All right, folks, I'm so glad that you have joined us today. Welcome to our final workshop of this fiscal year for the summer. So we're very excited for Laura and I to be able to join you today. I see some familiar names, so welcome back. If we haven't met you, we'll have a chance to introduce all of ourselves in just a moment here. I do want to take a minute just to note that however you feel comfortable participating today is great. Sometimes having your camera on or off or different things on different days work for you individually. And so I want you to know that if your camera is on, anyone who might walk through your screen or any pets are welcome as well. And also, of course, to take care of yourself during the session. So if you need to step away to get a water, take care of yourself in other ways, you're always welcome to do that. We're going to be monitoring the chat today. So we will be looking for any stories or ideas or questions or other things that you'd like to share there so that we have an opportunity to hear your voices and make this a real collaborative space. So feel free to do that. And at the end of our time today, if you're able to continue joining us a little past 11 o'clock, we're going to have some time to have some more discussion around this and to bring some different things that might come up during the session to light and share them with one another and get some feedback. So you'll be welcome to join us for that more specific discussion as well. So without further ado, Laura, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and sharing the slides and we'll get started today. So our workshop today is building your toolbox for student support. We're really going to be thinking about what it means to be able to support our students in meaningful ways that also are still using our roles and our abilities and the different things we have to offer well without facing burnout. And so today, your toolbox, I imagine, already has a number of things in it. We're going to look at ways that we can think about organizing it differently and having more opportunities to share it with other people in our circles.
Amy, sorry, I just want to confirm, can you guys see this? No.
No, it still says loading. Is that what it says on your end?
Yeah, I'm gonna try again.
Okay, that
Okay.
sounds good. All right, while we get that set up, I will encourage you to go ahead and put your introductions in the chat. And also, if you see on your screen your Zoom name doesn't match the name that you'd like to be called today, this is a good opportunity to check that as well, make that change. But we have an opportunity to get to know one another a bit and see who's in the room. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind adding your name, your organization, I'll put these in here so you can see them. And the last thing I'm going to ask you to share today is a skill or gift that you value in your coworkers. So if you can put those three things in your introduction so we can learn a little bit more about who you are. All right, Laura, looks good.
Great.
Go ahead and jump to that next slide with the introductions. There it is. Okay, great. So your name, your organization, or the population that you teach, and a skill or gift that you value in your coworkers. So take a moment to think about that and share that in the chat. While you all are doing that, Laura and I will go ahead and make our introductions as well. So Laura, if you want to go to the next slide, then go ahead and go first.
Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see some familiar names, and if some of you are new, it's great to meet you. I work right now at the College of New Jersey. I'm teaching at a state university. I teach grad students and undergrad, so I do some adult ed, some young adult ed. And I have a background of about 15 years of teaching. Previously, I was teaching literacy at community colleges here in Philadelphia and in Washington State. And I'm excited for this workshop today.
Awesome. I'm excited to be with you as well. My name's Amy Ballard. If we've not met before, I have about 10 years of experience in the adult ed community with ESL and high school equivalency prep and community college writing composition courses, curriculum writing, tutoring, a little bit of everything. And so I see a lot of folks from different backgrounds today and excited to share that with you. Something that I really value in coworkers and having other people are the people who slow us down and ask questions along the way when it seems like something is moving forward really quickly. And we think we have a plan, we think we have an idea, and they can stop and say, well, what about this? Or what about this person? Or what about this situation? And really cause us to stop and rethink a little bit of that. That has been such a value to me throughout my career. Laura, did you get a chance to share something that's valuable to you? Sorry if I missed that.
Um, yeah, I really admire the way a lot of my coworkers will just go the extra mile to support students who are struggling, reaching out, communicating if someone's not in class, or following up on like what someone might need for some extra academic support. The university doesn't have a lot of resources right now for access services and things like that. And so it's really on individual faculty members to like help create that. And a lot of my colleagues are really retooling themselves. They might not have come into their positions with all of these skills that they needed to reach every student. And a lot of them really go the extra mile to try to get those on board.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. And I'm seeing a ton of ideas in the chat. I saw teamwork. I saw the creative ways that they reach out to students. The participant-centered environment, excellent. Accountability, respect for the students. Respect for the students we work with, again, great. Empathy in coworkers, a student-centered approach, again, excellent. Yeah, these are all really important things to be thinking about. And today we're going to be focusing on, we use the language of building your toolbox for student support. And it's important for each of us to come with different skills and thinking about how we support the people in our classrooms as more than just learners. But it's even more important that we're not the ones doing it by ourselves and that we have a team of people around us that we can trust and that we value that can help us do that work. So thank you for sharing those and for sharing your introductions today. So today, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to start with a grounding moment, which is a practice that Laura and I do in each of these sessions, and something we hope that you can use for your own practices to ground yourself before moving into a classroom space, and even with your learners as well as an opportunity for them to enter a space. After that, we're going to look at the strengths and needs in your classroom and organization, and thinking about what is your role in all of that and how do we set good boundaries around that so that we can address these things well in our role. And lastly, we're going to look at connecting with your organization and community, what it means to build that network. And we'll have some time at the end to really dig in deep with some discussion and questions if you're able to stay for that. So I'll invite Laura to get us started with a grounding moment.
So yeah, this is a practice that Amy's really not necessarily introduced to me, but like reintroduced to me and kind of got me on board with as a teacher. And like Amy said, this is an invitation to us to do together in this space, but also for those of us who work regularly and directly with students, something that we can also incorporate because as Amy's going to talk about, of course, today, people are coming from all kinds of places when they come to us. And so there's a variety of ways that we can ground. And so before we ground today, I just wanted to invite you to check in with yourself, with your internal stress level, and just give that, like maybe think about your morning before you got here, any snafus that might have occurred, anything you're kind of thinking about bringing and dealing with, and give your stress level a number from 1 to 10. 1 being like very relaxing, almost as though you're like on the beach, on vacation, in a flow state, and 10 being like, of course, like a very high level of stress. And, the invitation is to just notice and do this without judgment. Okay, so you could take out a piece of paper to do this and a pencil, or you could just call to mind, imagine writing down, what are all the roles that you've played so far today? Maybe there was a role in getting some children out of the house this morning. Maybe there was a role in dealing with neighbors on your way to work or with your coworkers. Just think about all of those roles and the different ones that you've already taken on today, even though it's only 10, 15 in the morning. And imagine that each of them is something you can put on like a hat. I'm just going to invite you, as you call this to mind, to just in your own way, take a breath. So now in your mind's eye, take a few breaths. Whatever pace you're breathing is fine. You don't need to adjust it. And just imagine taking off all of those hats or any other things you might feel that you put on today. Anything that doesn't fit the present moment. If you want to, feel free to thank each hat as it comes off. Just taking them off one by one. There's no rush, but once you have removed the hats, take a moment and just set an intention for the role that you want to be in today during this time together. And lastly, before I turn it back over to Amy, just invite you to take another moment. This took 3 minutes to do, and just check in with yourself again about that number for your stress level from 1 to 10. Just with curiosity, like, what is that number now? All right, Amy, back to you.
Laura, thank you so much for leading us through that. That everybody had a chance to kind of evaluate where you are, and especially using this today, going to help us to think about a little bit of what our learners face, especially for those of you working with adult learners, but all learners bring different things into the classroom, and about what we carry with us as well. So thinking about our theme today, it comes up for me because when our learners walk into a classroom, it's never just their responsibility to be a learner. That's not just their sole focus in the world. There's a lot else going on. And in many ways, that's going to flood into our classrooms. So whether or not that's a piece of our direct experience, we need to be acknowledging that it is something that's affecting the learners. So a lot of things can come up for this. So for example, transportation could be an issue. It could be access and timing of transportation. There's a learner that cannot make it to class on time because of when their job ends and when the class begins and when the bus gets to both of those places. So that can be an issue that impacts their ability to participate in your class. Their workload. Right, a learner can't finish their work, and that could be affected because they have caretaking responsibilities at home. They're working with an adult, another family member, a child that needs additional care, and there's other things demanding their time. Their mental and physical health can be coming up. So maybe a learner is accessing a new medication and it's taking more of their energy or changing the way that they interact. That's going to affect the classroom dynamic. Housing insecurity, but a learner has been looking for a new home since their landlord announced that their home was going to no longer be available. That's going to affect their ability to concentrate and what their focus is. If there's food insecurity, then the learner might be spending a lot of their time and resources on making sure that there is food available for people in their home, or feeling the pangs of hunger during a lesson. Community safety concerns. If there's violence in a community that's made a learner feel unsafe in leaving their home and coming to class, that could cause an issue with being able to be present there. Current legislation and legal things happening. A learner may not be able to concentrate because there's a new law passed that's affecting their feeling of safety, or there's family's immigration status or a sense of welcome in their community. So all of these things, right, from things that are, maybe more individual in the home to things that are affecting large groups of people, are going to be on our learner's mind. And these are things that are affecting each person's ability to take in new information, to focus, to learn, to participate in a community. And so while they are not part of our curriculum building and our lesson planning necessarily, they still are part of our classroom. And so for many educators, the balance with this then is figuring out, how do I recognize these things that are coming up? and how do I help in the ways that I'm able to help and support, but without it becoming another job or another life or something that I'm not equipped to do. So if you're, maybe an educator, but you feel like this is something that I need support from a social worker, I need support from other organizations, that's absolutely normal. And we need to look at ways that we can manage those things. So we're going to move into the next section, which is about thinking about the strengths and needs of your classroom. So I want you to think about, and you can add to the chat as well, what needs do you see most often in your classroom or the community surrounding your program? And how do you learn about those needs? Do you see them on the news? Do your learners talk about them? How do they come up in your environment? So what are some needs that you see most in your classroom or the community surrounding your classroom there? Something I want you to think about as you're putting that in the chat is, are there needs that you know about for sure, and some needs that maybe you just suspect from the community, from things that you've seen? How do you differentiate those as well? So I want you to consider evaluating your organization's openness to hearing the needs of your community. How does your organization make themselves available for that? How do instructors and educators in your organization make themselves available to that? And how are we receiving this information? So as we're thinking about these individual needs that learners may bring in and things that affect the community as a whole, um, we want to consider not just how we're getting information individually, but how we're also sharing that information as an organization so that multiple people can be contributing. One thing that I like to do to find out a little bit more about needs in an environment is to do an introductory writing assignment when learners come in. It's something that is not graded for grammar or length or content. It is really just an opportunity to get a voice out there and to share some things that are going on. So I set a few guidelines, what I'd like you to include, some things that you could share, but it gets an opportunity for folks to share the personal side of things that are going on. Some of the questions that I might ask are things like, what's something I might not know about you if you didn't tell me here? That gives students an opportunity to really look at, this is just the classroom. You might not know that I have 4 kids at home. You don't get to see them when I'm here, right? And so that tells me a little bit more about the demands on their life. You might not know that in my home country, I had this job. And so that tells me a little bit more about their experience. You might not know that in my community, this is currently happening, or this is the status of something going on. And so those kinds of things just help us to examine a little bit more of their experience. I see a few things coming up in the chat. Laura, would you mind sharing a few of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So someone shared lack of technology and lack of knowledge using technology as a need. And then I shared a list of needs that I see at my college. Oh, I see a couple new ones coming in from participants here. Someone wrote, I help low-income first-generation students. They typically need assistance with understanding the college application process and having access to college. They might not have a lot of access to resources that aren't low income. Housing and clothes. We have a student support person and give participants a list of things they can get help with. Then participants directly communicate with us what they need. My students keep me informed about their community and personal issues. It's a great advantage that we have small classes. Yeah, absolutely. I will say that all of the needs I hear are directly from students in moments before or after class, for the most part during office hours and emails. And I wrote needs for mental health support with depression, anxiety, or feelings of not belonging, stress due to economic stressors of college, other debt, stress due to working full time and being a student, need for more connection and support when many students are caretakers of family members who are ill, needs for support around disabilities and learning differences from the college, needs for mental health resources and peer support groups for many reasons, needs to see professors who look like them, especially for students from marginalized groups.
Amazing. Those are fantastic ideas, a fantastic list of things that come up. And I imagine that we hear them resonated between the different groups here as well as you see other folks' ideas. So thank you so much for sharing those today. These are big, heavy topics to be hearing from learners. And again, we are only wearing so many hats at one time and are only able to carry so much at one time. So I want to think about ways that we can be creative in our specific roles about carrying some of those things. So Laura, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, we're going to look at some of the things that help us to figure out what might be issues that are coming up for learners. So I added a few of these ideas here. I apologize, I realized right before today that a few of them got separated from each other. But thinking about what are the things that they're bringing to the table. And these could be both strengths and needs, depending on where the status of them are. And their educational background, what's their job history, what's the stability in their home, what's their current medication status and needs and what they have that might be working right now. Where's their involvement in a recovery process if they're recovering from addiction or something else coming through? What's their access to transportation? What are their friends and family and the social connections that they have to be able to rely on? What do they have a spiritual connection that they rely on that helps sustain them? Do they are they receiving legal support in some way? What are their different intellectual abilities? What is their connection to resilience and how they approach different hardships that come up? And again, what supports they have around that process? What are their different talents that they're bringing to this? How are they sleeping and how are other aspects of their health? All of these things are going to play a role. I've mentioned in previous workshops, but it's one of the things I learned as I have explored a lot more about trauma-informed approaches in a classroom and really thinking on that level. As I used to be very frustrated when students were sleepy in class, or they would, regularly be kind of falling asleep or dozing or feeling like they were laying their head down a lot. And I took it more personally. It's like this person doesn't even care about being in this class. And I found that the more I probed into that and started asking questions, I started learning a lot more about, that student actually has been working night shifts and then coming straight from there to this class in the morning. Or this learner has been, again, on a new medication. It's changed the way that they're able to sleep and take care of themselves. Or they, their partner just had a new baby and they've been up a lot at night. And those kinds of things change how I approach the subject. And so really, when we're thinking about looking at strengths and needs, I always like to start with the strengths-based approach and say, what is, open it up for the learners to talk about what's going on here when we see things like that coming up, like sleeping in class or in different levels of engagement. But it's also important, like so many of you are mentioning, when learners share things specifically about what's going on and thinking about the resources that might be available for the different needs they're presenting as well. So when we know these things, again, help us decide what resources we need to connect to and how we can share them with learners. This is especially important because we can have all the resources in the world in our minds. And if they're not accessible to learners in some way, they just aren't going to do any good. So this is going to help us to know what to ask for ourselves in our networks, in our institutions, and keep us from taking on all the weight of responsibility and the heaviness that can come with learning a lot of these things. So this way, as educators, we can focus on putting our energy into adapting our teaching and appropriately caring for the learners and helping them get support in the bigger community of spaces. All right, Laura, anything else that we need to address from the chat before we move on?
This was me again, and we're going to continue to read the chat also as an accessibility feature and for the recording as well. So I love the idea of incorporating strengths, Amy, in the conversation, like not just asking about needs, but strengths. And it just made me think of my son's IEP for second grade and how hard we fought to make sure that strengths were included in there for him. And so the instructors were better prepared to engage him. And of course, like as adult educators, that would be true for us as well. So love that idea.
Yes, so important to addressing that. And something I like to think about as well is something that takes the stress off of us is when we think about this as a learning community as a whole, and especially with adult learners, some of the best resources that I found is when one person shares, perhaps with the group even, that something is going on. Maybe it's the housing insecurity, and another person says, "Hey, have you checked with this organization? They're over on Second Street in Old City, and I wonder if you know anything about them. And that's been just like such a gift to have learners share, this is what's worked for me, and I have benefited, I have this strength now, this knowledge and this security, and I can now share it with you as well. Right. So we'll continue moving forward because I want to start thinking about, now that we're identifying the strengths and needs, looking at what is in our communities, we need to think about our role, our boundaries, and our limits. So on the next slide, I have a few questions for you to consider in that. So the first one is, what is my role as an educator in my institution and organization? We talked about all these hats that we wear every single day and different things that come up. But I want you to think not just about like maybe what was written in your job description when you took the job, but what you've realized within your role that you play to these students each day. Now, once we get that role kind of written out, and this is something that you could take with you to really think about throughout this coming week and this weekend, if you want to dig a little deeper into this, it's a great opportunity to write these things out, because you might be surprised at some of the things that come out as you really start to flesh it. But I want you then to look at the role that you believe that you play and ask yourself, what is my primary goal? And what do I need to do to support that goal? And who do I need to help me in that? So oftentimes, again, because there are so many demands on the learners in our community, we can be drawn away from what our primary goal is. And as educators, if our primary goal is within that classroom, we of course, again, need to acknowledge the things that exist, but we can focus on our strength of what we are offering here. And we can think about the ways that we offer our education, the ways that we offer different opportunities for them to write and share, the ways that we open up our classroom space to be able to welcome all that comes into our classroom, but that can be our primary thing, that educating, that providing these opportunities can be our primary goal. And then the last question to think about with this is more kind of a paring down. And that's, what things am I currently doing that are not serving me or my learners? And one of the very simple things that I found early on, before I was in more formal education, I was a home visiting social worker. And I found there was a lot to carry each day when you are inside of people's homes and hearing about intimate details of difficult parts of their life. And I found that it was not serving me to go home and keep researching each day. And so it actually was just wearing me down more to feel like I came home from work and just thought about work all the time. And I found that it was wearing my friends and family down to see that I was constantly worn down by work. And so even though that felt like something really important and I need to find this resource and I need to see if I can get them connected with that lawyer, this program, it actually was not serving the community as a whole. It was wearing me down. And so that's something we also need to consider in our roles, is making sure that we're being more specific about that. You have limits, I have limits, we all have our different limits, and we can't be everything or everywhere. So when we know how to work within those limits, we have a lot more strength. So on to the next slide, I want you to think about being deliberate about your role. So you'll see those hats again, just like we talked about at the beginning. Which hats are you bringing into your classroom? Which ones are you leaving before you step in? And which ones do you leave there after you step out? So some things you could start thinking about in determining this, in addition to the questions that we saw on the last slide, are things like finishing the sentence. My role is to, what? It is not my role to. I can build connections in the community to help with. I could be an advocate for. And the support I need from my institution and organization is. I'm actually going to put those in the chat so you can look at those as well. That's another way to hone in what it is that you're doing. I'm sure you've heard something along these lines before, but the reason that I want to be deliberate about the roles is that when we are saying no to some things and being specific, it allows us to give a really big resounding yes with great energy and great support and great knowledge to other things. So this process and the sentences that I've given you in the chat, they might take time and they might take multiple iterations. I know that if you would have asked me 5 years ago what my role as an educator was, it would have looked different than what I would tell you today in this same exercise. And so this might be something that you have to come back to, and it could be something you come back to in a week or a month. It could be something you check in with every 6 months, or it could be something that you know to keep in your back pocket for when you start to feel a little overwhelmed or out of sorts in your role as a way of checking back in. But it will certainly change over time. All right, so I'm going to move on to talking about setting boundaries with yourself and your learners. So we have a lot of benefits of setting boundaries. And again, I'm sure that's not new information, but I find that it's information that I often need kind of reinforced and repeated to remember that it is an important process. So I want to highlight some of the benefits of boundary setting and talk about what that can look like. So we're going to start with the first one, is that it actually just allows everyone to know what to expect. Part of the issue is that if you are in a role where you're able to provide certain things and not others, it can be very frustrating for everyone when they come to you and say, I really need this. And you're kind of in this back and forth, like, I actually can't provide that. You know, I don't have that and access to that resource. I don't have those abilities. I don't have those credentials, whatever it might be. And so having a clear boundary on this is what I am available for, you know, I can help you brainstorm. I can help you meet someone who will be able to help with this. Those are all great things. I can, you know, I have 20 minutes after class today that I'm able to stay and listen if you need someone to help listen today. But there are clear boundaries so everyone knows what they're getting involved with. The next one is that it reduces a sense of urgency. So oftentimes things can feel really urgent, and a lot of times things are urgent in some of these situations. That does happen. But if every single thing that comes up in our classroom with every learner feels like something that you need to address and fix right away, that's a sense that we don't have a good boundary with what we're hearing from them. And so it absolutely can be something that we feel a sense of like, oh, that's really important to the learner and I want to help support them. But if everything that comes up is something that you're feeling like, oh no, like we need to stop everything right now and get this taken care of, that's actually a hindrance to the greater classroom and to your ability to work with those things. So having a few of those boundaries, again, helps you to feel less urgent.
Is it okay to hop in with a thought there, Amy?
Please, yes.
There's a poet, Dorothy Lasky, who says, like, if everything is red, then nothing is red. Like another way to say this is like, if everything's urgent, actually nothing's urgent. So I love that, like, when we clarify what our role is, like when those things come up, they can be urgent, right, for us. So yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to say that. Thank you, Laura. So our next one is that it reduces burnout. We're actually going to look at some of the ways that this manifests here very shortly with something called trauma exposure response. But burnout can happen so quickly in these kinds of professions where we're investing in other people and investing in their lives and the ways that they're growing and changing. And it's really beautiful work. And it also can lead us to a space where we aren't, again, helpful to ourselves or the community that we're serving. So again, setting boundaries allows us to have that barrier. Next one is that it helps learners know that they can count on educators for, and I should have a ... there, because there's different things in different communities that you're going to need. And so your learner, again, can then come into the space and say, you know, there's a problem at home. I know I can ask my teacher and they might be able to direct me somewhere. Or I know that the front desk person at my organization has a list of resources. I'm going to go ask them. So just being clear about like what's available, what's offered, what they can share and when, it's a really helpful space for them. Our next is that it gives the educator time to rest, recover, and unplug from your work. So again, like I mentioned before, my early work in social work, home visiting, that was really challenging. I didn't get to give myself a chance to unplug from the work. I was thinking about it or working on it or Googling something all of the time. And it didn't allow me to really feel like I was present when I was actually doing the work because I was feeling the burnout from that. So rest and recovery are absolutely some of the most essential things that we need in these professions. And lastly, it opens up opportunities to build stronger community connections where proper help can be offered. And I think this is the most invaluable thing. We can't put a price on the community connections that we form. There are lots of organizations. I know many of you are coming from the Philadelphia area, but all in different communities that are doing different work that are meeting specific needs. And I found with learners, specifically when I was working with a high school equivalency program, that it was one thing to say to them, I think that this organization's offering, an opportunity to get free clothes. It was another thing to say, you know what, our closet is going to be here at this specific location. And I have worked with Mike, who was there, and I know that he'd be happy to help you. So my work had become connecting with the community and meeting some people and having some connections there. And then instead of feeling the weight of, my learner really needs new clothes for their kids for the upcoming school year, and I'm feeling a lot of stress about that with them, I can say, you know what, I have a great resource and here's the person I'm connecting with. And so I think the more that we can focus on those strong community connections and the work that's being done so specific in those areas, that can be such a value as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about boundaries weakening, but before we do that, Laura, is there anything else to address in the chat?
I just threw in there this last point seems really huge to me. You're talking about allowing our learners to know, like, oh, I can go here for this resource and there for that resource, and like expanding that map. And this is also part of when we learn about trauma responses and nervous system functioning, like the ability to orient is really fundamental to our ability to like down regulate our fight or flight responses. So if we know like what the resources are around us and where we can accurately go for things, that's also literally giving our like somatic experience like a chance to just relax for our learners.
Oh, that's a great wording of that. Thank you so much. Yeah, we need those opportunities to be able to connect in larger ways. So what happens when our boundaries weaken or are not set or are not well protected? The reality is that often we can absorb traumatic experiences that are shared with us, a secondary response to that trauma. And we're exposed through our learners and community and can become overwhelmed. And that's when we can see things like trauma exposure response. So I wanted to share some of these because sometimes they can be overlooked as ways that trauma is manifesting in our bodies. This is coming from Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot with Connie Burke. And I took this particular visual from the Lawani Community Mental Health Authority, who put these ideas together. Thank you, Laura, for sharing that. So with that, I want to take a look at what these can manifest as this trauma exposure response. I'm going to make sure that these slides are sent out afterwards. So you will have an opportunity to look at all of these in more detail as they come up, but I want to share the big ones that we see first. So you might experience feelings of helplessness or hopelessness as a trauma exposure response. You could have a sense that you can never do enough. You can have a sense of hypervigilance where you feel like you have to watch every detail and everything very closely. You can have diminished creativity and feel like you don't have anything new to offer in the classroom. It could be an inability to embrace complexity. So you want things just to be an issue of right and wrong and black and white, and that's just the way that it is, and kind of wipe your hands of that. Could be minimizing. So you're feeling like you're responding less to when others share their experience or pain. On the next one, the chronic exhaustion or physical ailments could be a way that this shows up in the body. And again, kind of going back to that somatic experiencing that Laura is talking about, we see a lot of symptoms of trauma show up in different ways in the body. Not age-old, but the classic book now of The Body Keeps the Score has a great way of remembering that. Inability to listen or deliberate avoidance when you hear something like this come up. Dissociative moments where you try to dissociate or remove yourself from the situation mentally. A sense of persecution, like I have no power over my work, I have no ability to control this. Also could be guilt or fear. And the final four that I want to share with you here, anger and cynicism, inability to empathize or numbing to different emotions, addictions, and a sense of grandiosity. So I don't know who I'd be if I didn't do this work. Who would do this? And that kind of sense that comes up. So you can see from just that list, there are so many ways that this can manifest in our lives. And being aware of the different ways it can come up helps us to be able to address it. And so our work in serving students and paying attention to these things and being part of a learning community and a greater community is to pay attention to these and to build a support network of people who can help us see them in one another. I think this is especially important because any one of these could go unnoticed on our radar, especially as they build over time. But when you have someone else in your life who starts to hear those things or see those things and who you've given permission to speak to those things, that can be really helpful for them to check in. A group that I've worked with before in different educational settings has a practice of making your own personal safety plan. And if you carry like a name badge or something like that, to put it on the back so it's easily accessible. But part of the system of creating a personal safety plan to say, you know, if I'm getting stressed out, I can take a deep breath. I can, you know, walk out for 1 minute and recover. I can, you know, having a short list of things that you can do to help recover. A part of that is also sharing it with at least one other person in your institution. So if they see you walking around very stressed out and feeling, you know, dysregulated, they could say, "Hey, Amy, why don't you take a minute and go take a deep breath in the hallway and I'll watch your class for a second." And that's an ability to kind of check in with one another. So having that connection is really also invaluable in the classroom. All right, so having an understanding of those and also knowing that we will encounter a lot of different needs regularly, we need to think about two things. So we've talked a bit about boundaries, and boundaries are going to allow us to do our best work for our learners and ourselves and our communities. But the second part that we need to think of here then is having the resources that we need. So resources are going to help us best serve our learners without all of the responsibility on our shoulders. So we have to have both pieces for this to function well. So moving along, we don't do any of this work alone. The moment that we start to think that we are doing some of this work alone is also a moment that we need to check in, along with all of those signs that you saw before with the trauma exposure response. If you are starting to think, I'm the only one who's carrying this in my organization, that's a moment when we need to start rethinking our connections and the weight that we're carrying, because we can't do any of this without community. So on the next slide, you'll see a little diagram here with the different connections. And I want us to think about learners, educators, organizations, and the communities around us as all being part of this network together. In order to do any of this work, right, we have to have an environment where our learners feel that they can share the needs that are coming up, that our educators and folks that are working in the organization can receive that information, also notice when things are coming up, even that maybe aren't spoken, that our organizations can function in a way to help to share and facilitate the information that's going out to learners as they need supports, and that our communities can be a part of that. And throughout, this is the needs-based side of it, but throughout all of that we also have the strengths-based side, that the educators and the administrators know what their strengths are, they're able to offer within the organization and within the goal of that organization. That we recognize what strengths the learners are bringing each day to the classrooms, what they are able to do on their own and with each other and in support of their community, and what they're able to maybe even offer to each other, as like the example mentioned earlier. And also thinking about the community as a whole. What is it that's being able to be offered there? And how can we build stronger connections so that everyone has access to those things? All right, so taking a look at the next slide, I want to introduce something called the parallel process model. So this is from Dr. Sandra Bloom, and she presents this as a way of understanding how organizations come to be in certain ways. So no organization is perfect, and it's important to know that there's something on this list somewhere that can apply to even the best organizations and the strongest ones. So we can use it as a tool to see the point of change and then think creatively about what it means to make these changes. But I want you to take a look at how these things line up. I tend to like to start on the organization side for my own understanding and move backwards on it. But you can move in any direction in thinking about these things. So often when an organization is unsafe, then the clients are going to feel unsafe, the staff might feel unsafe. But we can also look at that in reverse, right? If the clients are feeling unsafe, oftentimes that's going to lead to staff feeling unsafe, and then it leads the organization becoming unsafe. And so these are things that feed into one another. One can't exist without the other. It's how the parallel process connects. For an organization that's punitive, we'll often see angry and aggressive clients and staff. For an organization that's stuck, that can't seem to move forward, whether it's in its model or in what it's able to offer, it often leads to helplessness in the clients and the staff. When an organization is fragmented, we see the same thing in the clients and the staff also feeling fragmented. When there's a crisis-driven organization, everything is urgent, everything's an emergency, we'll see hyper-arousal in the clients and the staff. And when there's an overwhelmed organization, we're going to see overwhelm then in the clients and the staff. And so these symptoms can pop up in different ways. Maybe you see them on the organizational level. Maybe you're starting to notice them in your learners. Maybe you're noticing them on the staff. But when they exist in one part of this, they flood into other parts of the organization. And so I want to bring that up as a way to reimagine what the parallel process could be. So Laura, I'm going to get our next slide started, and then I'm actually I'm going to make a quick technology shift here, and so we'll get that going. But I want us to get a chance to reimagine what the organization would be. So Laura, if you don't mind reading through the organization list here and then inviting folks to participate in filling in some of those blanks, and I will be right back.
Okay, so let's go ahead and reimagine an organization that is safe, that is supportive of growth and change, that is focused on progress, that is unified, and that is operating within its mission and values, and that is well supported. So thinking about this as like the foundation for how this organization is operating. How might this organization support clients? How might this organization support staff? And just knowing that institutions are made up of people, though they can take life on their own, change is only made by people, whether this is through policy or through culture. So I'm going to invite you, while Amy's just stepped out, to just kind of try to brainstorm on your own some concrete ways that this organization might support its clients and staff. And please feel free to throw these thoughts into the chat if you would like to. And while we take a moment to brainstorm and reflect, Amy will be right back.
All right, Laura, thank you so much for leading that. I apologize for the quick shift there. So we had a bit of a technology problem. All right.
No problem, Amy. We were just asking everyone, it was a great moment to just stop and reflect and brainstorm. So I just asked everyone to kind of think about this on their own. And I haven't checked the chat yet to see if anything came in. It looked like not yet. So
Okay, no worries. So this is actually a tool that we'll be able to look at the end of our time together today. And I encourage you to use as well if it's something that might be helpful within your staff, to use this as a way to reimagine what you want an organization to look like. These are words that I've used on here as the organization column because I've tried to shift what was on the original parallel process model and think about what the opposites of those might be. But they can look a lot of different ways for your organization and what you might want it to manifest as. And so this is also a good opportunity to think about, what do you want for your organization? And then how do you want that to manifest in your clients or your staff? And again, you could use it in different columns. You could say, this is what I want our learners or clients to be able to experience. What do we need for staff to do that? And what would our organization be like if we did that? And so it's really an imaginative tool to be able to rethink where you are. Laura, did any ideas come in for what we might see in these blanks up to now?
Not yet, Abby.
Okay, no worries. Something I encourage you to continue thinking about, and of course, contribute in the chat if anything comes up. Something that I often think about is this safety one. And so I feel like for staff to feel safe, one of the things that comes up for me as an educator is I need to have a space that I feel comfortable sharing resources and ideas in. And that other people also feel free. There have been environments that I've worked in the past where folks keep resources tight. It's like, this is my connection. This is my person that I have connected with, and they want to keep that closer. And I found that creates a lot of tension in the staff, because then there's only one way to get to certain places. You have to go through a certain person. So that's an element of safety. And in thinking about these things, that goes for the clients too, that they have access to both people who can help them navigate this, but also open resources. One organization that I partnered with that was in North Philly did a great job of having a billboard open where anyone could post about community things that were coming up. So there was an eyeglasses clinic up there. There's a doctor's office that's offering free visits. There's a dental clinic. There's, all these different opportunities. And as you got information, you could share it there, and it was free for everyone. So just a few ideas to get us started there. All right, Laura, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide there. So I want to emphasize that when our organizations and learners and educators are working together toward a common good, there's something that happens. And I want to kind of offer that as a question to you. What is it that happens in our communities? So we have all these things working together. So when each organization, right, is pushing towards that common good, we're going to see effects in the larger scheme. And this is where those community connections really come in. Go ahead and go to the next one. We're going to have an opportunity for folks to share. This is a really neat thing that came to my attention about a year ago. And it's the idea of thinking about headlines from the future in reimagining our communities and reimagining the work that we're doing. So I want to invite you to share in the chat if you are thinking about this as I explain it, and you think of one that applies to your work. But this is an opportunity to think about if your work continues to go well and you're building up these communities, what are the headlines that we would see in the news ideally? And so oftentimes we see news headlines that have really sad and disappointing information about changes to immigration policies, or a shift in the graduation rate in Philadelphia schools, or all these different things, right, that can come up. And so I want us to think about what headlines might be. And I'm going to offer you a few examples of things that came to mind. In my work with high school equivalency, I often found that one of the issues is that high school graduation rates from the larger part of the population that I was working with was around 67% at the time they would have been of graduation age in Philadelphia school district. And so one of the things I look at is I think what makes a difference when we have all these folks who are graduated and are working towards their high school equivalency, and they're supporting their families and communities in that. So one of my headlines would be high school graduation rates up to 100%, thanks to educated, supported families and communities. We have a lot of support out there. Another one could be, job security strong for the small business owners in X community. We have opportunities for people that live in a specific community. Maybe those of you who work with libraries or other organizations, could be, library resource use and funding for community programs at an all-time high and growing. That would be what it might look like if we had some positive headlines into the future. So this could be an exercise that you use to help figure out part of your common goal for your organization that allows you to move from just the day-to-day to actually dreaming about a big picture of what you want your work to be like in its full impact, and to increase your sense of hope and drive toward that goal. So Laura, do we see any in the chat that folks have shared?
I'll keep an eye on there, Amy. I shared a few, one was Peer Mental Health Support Group offers volunteer mentoring to local high school students. There's always a need for more mental health resources than there are therapists available. And so our school has some peer mental health support groups going. And the second headline here was Student Support Group for Neurodiverse Students lobbies state legislature for educational access and change. Right now, there is one employee who handles all the access requests at a state university, and needless to say, that's not enough people. And so both of these I feel kind of mixed about, right? Because I was thinking about, well, how do we address this with an organization when the need is actually for more resources than are available, right? And so I don't want to imply with these headlines that the burden falls on the students to solve their own problem. But I also want to say that, like, in the meantime, when staff can work together to share resources, I'm sure everyone here sees this all the time and does this all the time, right? There is more possible than nothing. So I'm just kind of straddling those thoughts myself while I'm thinking about these headlines, Amy. But it's a great exercise. Oh, great. And we have another one here. Someone shared headline from the future. 100% of KC Scholars recipients receive full tuition to partner schools.
Amazing. Yes, I love that. And just kind of reimagining your work in that really positive light. And thank you, Laura, for expanding on and sharing those headlines as well. Yeah, this is it, right? This is kind of the hope builder. When I've done this with groups, we've often done it in person. You've had kind of sticky notes that you could put up for different ideas. And just to see the energy that comes out of it is really encouraging. So this could be an easy activity to take 5 minutes in your next staff meeting to be able to explore as well. Yes, the important work of hope. And Laura, just to go back to your point earlier, I mentioned advocacy as one of the things that we can think about in our role. And advocacy is really unique in that it allows us to really care about the things that we care about and feel like we're making an impact towards the future of that without holding all that immediate responsibility for the change to happen right now in our hands. And so it's an empowering piece. It's something you can involve other people in, but it also doesn't put all the weight on your shoulders. So I think that's a great example. Thank you. All right, so moving on, I want to think about what's next and getting your colleagues and organization on board. So part of this is that I want to suggest some activities that might help build a better bond with the community in the organization and outside of your organization to do this. So a couple of ideas for this, if you're wondering how to get started, or maybe you're feeling like you're kind of the only person thinking about this work right now in your organization, well, this is an opportunity to start to bring it to other people. One of the things that I have loved doing in the past is either as part of a staff meeting or as an additional meeting with other educators is doing what I call a best practices or a what's working meeting. And this is an opportunity for each person without being limited in to talk about something that is working well for them. So it could be something around classroom management. It could be something around connecting with students. It can be an activity or game. And it can also be, I had some learners that were dealing with this, and this resource was really helpful for me. But when that is used regularly, when people have the opportunity to clearly share something that's working, it builds some creativity, it builds some bonding among the staff, and it creates a culture of openness. Like people are thinking about what they might want to bring to that meeting next time. Another thing I want to share with you is thinking about shared information in an organization. And one of the sad things that I see often is that at some point in 2005, someone put together a fabulous document of all these organizations and ideas and places you could go and things you could do and people you could contact. And then it was never updated again and it becomes defunct. And so all this work kind of goes into nothing because it's not unusable in the long term. So if you are working with your organization and you're thinking about resources in your community that you want people to be able to connect to and you want your coworkers to be able to know about and be able to share, one thing I would suggest is if you want to keep those in a common space, like a document, that you have a regular time to update that. And again, that could be part of a meeting that you have, or you could have different people that are on that regularly to say, it's this month, these people are in charge of adding or changing anything on the document, and it becomes just a smaller task over time. But having regular check-ins with that, if that's a way that you're collecting information, is really valuable in just keeping that information moving rather than getting lost through people changing positions or just not getting the attention that it needs. And lastly, I would encourage you to think about a strengths and needs assessment as a group with your organization. Sometimes what you are seeing is not always what other folks are seeing, and it's helpful to get a bigger picture of things that might be going on. Maybe it helps you better understand a situation that you're experiencing, or your information can help someone else better understand something they're seeing in a classroom. But having all of that information together and really paying attention to what the strengths are in your community, what the needs are, is going to open up a lot of possibilities for you. So again, if you are thinking about ways to get your colleagues on board, that's something that I would encourage you to start looking at, is starting in one of those places. Right. On the next slide, I want you to think about yourselves as a living directory of living information. So as you're making connections in your community, as you are identifying a need and getting in touch with the program or the institution or the person, or the opportunity for advocacy or whatever it might be, recognize that that information is going to live with you. When I first became a social worker in this earlier part of my career, I would start talking to people and was just amazed at how many things they knew. Like, well, you've heard of, Cradles to Crayons. Like, no, I haven't. Tell me about that. How do people know all these things? And by the end of my time doing that, I felt like I had my brain full of things, but that it was hard to get all that information out to other folks. And so I want us to remember that as part of our responsibility of helping the community at large, that we have to commit to being open and sharing and trusting with this information with the people that we're working with to best serve our learners and our community as a whole and build those networks really strong. Because no one wins when we're siloed and we have, all the information on this and that somebody else has all the information on this. This is really our chance to expand out. So make it a priority when you learn something new to share, or to talk about a resource that continues to be helpful, or to prioritize this with the other staff at your organization and be part of that living directory. All right, so that brings us to a close of the information that I wanted to present today. At this point, we are going to have the opportunity to do a group brainstorm and be able to share some information. Laura, if you wouldn't mind, thank you, perfect. I have the questions in a document here that I would like us to think about and look at together. So there's a link in the chat there that you'll be able to use. And that'll give us an opportunity to really consider what we have available. Before we get into the brainstorm, I know I've seen some different chats come up. Laura, is there anything that we can share before we get started?
Philadelphia Fight produces a resource guide annually. To see it, go to fight.org, and that's in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. That's fantastic. Yeah, Philadelphia Fight, thank you. I know you all have been a resource to me in the past, so thank you for the work that you are doing in that.
Amy, would you like me to go to the group brainstorm to share my screen?
Why don't we go ahead and do that? And I will tell folks now, if you're unable to stay with us for the group sharing or need to move on, That's absolutely fine. Oh, apologize. I didn't realize my screen was a little low there. That's absolutely fine. No worries. And we would love to have you if you are able to stay. Go ahead and get those questions shared.
And should we continue with the recording? We often pause it at this point.
Let's go ahead and pause it. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.